One of the things that makes MLS such an entertaining league is that you rarely see the same team crowned champions each year. Now, don't get me wrong, there are definitely dominant teams that show up every season, but more often than not, you don't see the same winner back to back. In the 25 years that MLS has been around, there have only been 3 teams that have repeated consecutive MLS Cup victories. If you're familiar with the beginning years of the league, you'll know that DC United was the first ever dynasty, winning 3 of the first 4 MLS Cups, which included back-to-back 1996 and 1997 wins. So for those wondering where those 4 stars above the DC crest came from, well, now you know. The other team is the most well-known MLS team around the world. Donovan, Beckham, Kane, that team repeated in 2011 and 2012. But again, that's only 2 out of the 3 teams that have ever won the MLS Cup 2 years in a row. I'd be willing to bet that most casual fans of the league wouldn't know the last team that performed this rare accomplishment. It's not Seattle, even though they got close. It's not Toronto either, who also could have done it. And unfortunately for New England fans, even though they appeared in 5 Cup finals, including 3 in a row, it's not them either. The forgotten team? The Houston Dynamo, MLS Cup champions in 2006 and 2007. Wait, hold on. That's better. Now this is gonna sound strange for a minute, but bear with me. To see how this Houston team managed to pull off 2 consecutive championships, we actually are gonna have to look to California, where the San Jose Earthquakes were setting MLS regular season records during the 2005 season. Already with 2 MLS Cups under their belt, San Jose was adding to a stacked roster that included top MLS talents like goalkeeper of the year Pat Onstad, Ricardo Clark, Brian Ching, Dwayne De Rosario, and a whole supporting cast. Along with that, they also had the coach of the year in Dominic Kinner. The Quakes ended the season with an MLS record at the time of 68 points, the Supporter Shield, and became the first ever team to remain undefeated at home throughout the entire regular season. You're probably wondering, how does this Earthquakes team connect to Houston's eventual 2 MLS Cups? Why is it important that San Jose had an impressive roster and a successful season? Here's why. Although performing exceptionally well on the field, there were underlying problems within the ownership of the Earthquakes. 47 days after San Jose was knocked out of the playoffs, and 32 days after the conclusion of the 05 MLS season, the owners of the Earthquakes, Anschutz Entertainment Group, and Don Garber announced that the team would be relocating to Houston for the 2006 season. The first and only relocation that occurred in the MLS. Luckily, this decision was attributed to the owners' failures to secure a soccer-specific stadium for the Quakes, but Don Garber made it pretty clear that no matter what happened, an expansion side would be awarded to the Texan city. Houston was the 4th biggest city in America during this transition, and they were putting up impressive attendance numbers during international friendlies. None bigger than the 69,592 fans that showed up for a USA-Mexico match in 2003. Not only were these attendance numbers the largest for a soccer event in Texas, but it was the 3rd most attended US men's national team game at the time. So you could see why they thought Houston were fit for a new professional soccer franchise. Just like that, the record-setting players and staff of the 05 San Jose Supporter Shield winning team traveled 2,000 miles, were given some cowboy boots, and started fresh, forever orange. Now, finding any information on an MLS team from 15 years ago is quite the task. The league wasn't too popular to say the least, but I did manage to find a couple articles that looked at Houston's team as they prepared for their first year. So shout out to James Edwards for providing some insight on the 06 season for me. As expected, Edwards made it pretty clear that the new team winning some silverware would be expected. I mean, they literally just picked up an established team and placed it somewhere else. No learning curve, no expansion draft, no finding a play style. All that was already done. For their inaugural match, an audience of over 25,000 watched as the Dynamo beat Colorado 5-2, with Brian Ching scoring 4 and an Alejandro Moreno bicycle kick. Houston, they took off. They had a pretty good season until just over halfway through the year. In their first 18 games, Houston put 8 wins on the board, but in their final 14, they only managed a total of 4 wins, a trend that we would see come up again later. So the end of the 06 regular season wasn't clean, but they did make the playoffs. It's important to remember that in 2006, the MLS did not look like it does today. There were only 12 teams in the league at this time, and that meant each conference had 6 teams. Once 4 out of those 6 teams qualified for the playoffs, let's just say it was much easier to make the playoffs than it is now.
Houston rules!
One thing Houston always had going for them was their supporters. The team recorded the 3rd highest average attendance, only being behind leaders LA Galaxy by about 2,000. They were also dominant at their home field, where they only lost 3 times all year. After beating Chivas USA in the conference semifinals and Colorado knocked out rivals FC Dallas in the other matchup, it was pretty smooth sailing to the final for the Dynamo. The 2006 MLS Cup welcomed in the newest members of the league, the Houston Dynamo, and 05's runner-up, the New England Revolution, led by a familiar face in Taylor Twellman. After a scoreless 90 minutes, the game went into extra time where we saw 2 goals scored a minute apart from each other on both sides. This would be the first Cup final where it would end in PKs. Now, I'm not surprising anyone by saying that Houston won, because that's what this whole video is about. But Houston managed to pull off an MLS Cup victory in their first year in their new city, an accomplishment that only the Chicago Fire managed to do in their expansion season. Going into their second year in existence, Houston had a pretty good chance to pull off a repeat championship after they maintained most of their 06 winning team. But to begin the 2007 season, Houston lost 5 out of their opening 8 games. But then the real Houston team showed up and they went on an 11-game unbeaten run that launched them to the top of the Western Conference. They would eventually fall down after a few draws later in the season, but they would be one of the 3 teams that advanced to the playoffs through the revised playoff rules. It almost seems like an exact repeat from the 2006 season, because once again, the Dynamo's home field advantage was very strong. After losing the first leg to rivals FC Dallas 1-0, in the second, they smashed them 4-1 in front of 30,000 spectators. Then, the next match, another 30,000 fans watched them take out SKC 2-0. For the 3rd year in a row, the New England Revolution found themselves in MLS Cup, and for the 2nd consecutive year, they had to face the Dynamo. Just like in 2006, Taylor Twellman would open up the scoring, and Houston would respond. In the 74th minute, MLS Cup MVP Dwayne De Rosario would score a bullet header and crush the Revolution's hopes once again. For the first time since 1997, a team won MLS Cup back to back. And not only was it just another team who did it, it was an expansion team that won it for the 2nd time in just their 2nd year in the league. Like every good story though, there's a darker side to it. San Jose Earthquake fans, who just a few years ago were celebrating their 2nd title, now we're watching their team add 2 more championships to the roster that was theirs. Now, San Jose did get a team back in their city for the 2008 season, but they had to build it from the bottom. Meanwhile, the team that was cultivated in California was adding championships in Texas. If the team never relocated, it's pretty likely that at least one, if not both, of those MLS Cups would have been won by the Quakes. And it would have cemented their place as a dynasty. But the Houston fans won't be complaining about that. They managed to get the team they wanted, have it compete from the start, and successfully pull off a back-to-back win without a lot of the hard work that comes from creating an expansion roster from nothing. Since pulling off these heroics, Houston stayed competitive for a few more years, and most notably made it to another 2 MLS Cups, which they lost and allowed LA Galaxy to become the 3rd team to pull off a championship repeat in 11-12. Now I feel as if this Houston team has slowly been forgotten because they've been in a decline since these glory years. In 2019, Houston recorded the 5th lowest average attendance in the league, and they've lost their competitive spark that they had at their inception. A lot of fans feel the ownership is letting them down, and under their current leadership, another MLS Cup appearance seems unlikely. But no matter how bad it gets, Houston still remains in the record books as one of 3 teams to ever pull off back-to-back MLS Cup victories. And in my opinion, that's something they should be proud about.